CBS Sports, kind enough to spend a few minutes with us talking about it this afternoon. So, David, last week we talked a fair amount on Wednesday about Mississippi State and Michigan State, and you didn't make a lot of friends in our listening audience. I think there were people that that did not like what you had to say at all, and they let us know on our text line. And then, doggone, if it didn't almost play out exactly the way you described it. Michigan State was the more physical team. One of the things we talked about after that game on Thursday, and I know you weren't in person to watch it, but that was not the best version of Mississippi State last Thursday. And that's probably the toughest part. It's not like they got beat playing their best game. They didn't play very well.
No, they didn't. That was a dud, a clunker of a way to go out after what they showed against Tennessee. And I understand why that Tennessee game sparked a lot of optimism among Mississippi State fans. That was a really impressive showing, and it offered you a glimpse at sort of what the ceiling was for Mississippi State basketball. And the ceiling was a whole lot better than what they showed against Michigan State. And that's tough to deal with when you feel like you have a little bit of momentum maybe going into the big dance, and then you play a clunker like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, you gotta tip your cap to Michigan State and just realize that you get matched up with Tom Izzo in March. It's never ideal, and that was a veteran Michigan State team that took care of business, and then ultimately had a double-digit lead on North Carolina in the first half 2 days later before kind of running out of gas down the stretch.
I have long said, and I think most people believe this, there are a few detractors as well. We love Cinderella on the first 2 days of the NCAA tournament. We don't love Cinderella in the second weekend. It's like, let's get the great story and then have the great teams win, the name brand teams win, and get to the second weekend, and let's really figure out who the best team is in this format. Every 1 seed is alive. Every 2 seed is alive. And we've got really, really good matchups, I think, in all 8 games.
I'm with you, Richard. I think this is going to be a phenomenal weekend because there's some really good talent that's going to be out there in matchups that we don't really get to see all that often. Like, I know, obviously, Purdue versus Gonzaga has already been played this year, and Purdue won that game by 10 points, but you go and look at Tennessee versus Creighton. We don't get SEC versus Big East all that often. Alabama versus North Carolina, 2 really high-scoring, interesting teams. And then maybe the most interesting matchup is the best offense in the country right now, Illinois, against the best defense in the country right now in Iowa State. And we hadn't even talked about Duke and Houston. So I'm with you. I would like to see one real Cinderella, and you can maybe cram NC State and DJ Burns into that Cinderella shoe if you want to. But there's not an Oral Roberts, there's not a St. Peter's, there's not a team like that this year. I'd like to see one of them, but all in all, it's hard to be mad about the quality of basketball that we're going to get to enjoy this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know that I would classify NC State as a Cinderella, but I do think I would classify them as like a public favorite. Like the team that just like the general public adopts. It feels like that story is about as good as any.
Yeah, no doubt. You got to love DJ Burns, man. He's a hoss out there, and he can put the team on his back, and that's what he's been doing these last couple weeks. And then they've kind of just come out of nowhere to be really good, and that's what makes college basketball unique. NC State had a losing record in conference play, and they're still here dancing. You don't see teams with a losing record in college football conference play have a chance to turn things around like that. So, on the flip side, maybe people say that's what devalues college basketball's regular season, the fact that an NC State is still here. And, that maybe there's a point to be had there. But it's fun to see a team like that get hot and get on a roll and to see the joy that they play with. And, let's be honest, they've earned their spot here because they had to win 5 games in 5 days in the ACC tournament, and that's about as tall of a task as you can accomplish in college basketball. So, yeah, I'm with you. They're the team that most closely sort of fits that sweetheart role.
What a contrast in styles when you look at Houston and Duke. Houston, such a physical team. Duke, not necessarily a team that is looking for that physical of style, and yet Houston just won a game to advance to the Sweet 16 by scoring 100, and you had a front row seat for it.
Yeah, how about that? It was the Friday games in Memphis were a little bit boring. They were kind of like mostly blowouts, and then Baylor Clemson was interesting, and then Houston Texas A&M was interesting, but it looked like Houston was going to run away with it, and then all of a sudden in the last 90 seconds, it turned into an absolute banger of a game, and yeah, Houston can get it done in a couple of different ways. And I know people are looking at the Cougars going into this weekend and thinking that their defense has fallen off and maybe they're susceptible against Duke. But on the flip side of that, they just scored 100 points. They've got Emmanuel Sharp going for 30. Jamal Shedd looks unstoppable. And they figured out a way to win against a really tough opponent. And now they go into a game against Duke where they're going to have a real physical edge in terms of the toughness that they play with and sort of the brute force that Houston brings to the table. So, yeah, what a game! What a way to cap the first weekend on Sunday night with just a wild game in Memphis.
Is there an intimidation factor that San Diego State is going to have to overcome against Yukon?
Yeah, because there's a lot of these San Diego State guys who were part of that game last year where Yukon pretty much steamrolled them in the second half of the national title game. So there's a little bit of that. And the unfavorable part of this for San Diego State is that their best player, Jaden Ledee, in the front court, he's great. He's phenomenal. But Yukon with Donovan Clingan in there at 7'2", they're pretty well equipped to handle what he's going to try and do to him down there on the block. So tough matchup for San Diego State. Their defense is just going to have to be lights out. They're going to have to find a way to hold Yukon under about 70 to have a chance in that game.
David, North Carolina and Alabama. It's a fascinating matchup. It's two teams that like to get up and down the floor, not afraid to play a game in the 90s or beyond if they need to. To me, for Alabama, this comes down to will they make shots? Because when Alabama makes shots, they're as good as anybody in the country. And then also, is there any defense in the tank for Bama?
You tip your cap because they did hold Grand Canyon down, in that second round win the other night. But there's a huge talent difference between Grand Canyon and North Carolina. Maybe even a Grand Canyon size talent differential there.
I see what you did there.
Right, you like that. I know. But I'm not ready to say that Alabama found itself on the first weekend. I don't think the quality of the opponent was very high for Alabama. I think there was a massive talent advantage for the Crimson Tide in both those victories. And now you got to go play a North Carolina team that has some really, really high-level players on it. So, yeah, the only hope really for Alabama is for them to hit about 15 or 16 threes. And they're capable of it. I mean, that's a version of Alabama that we see from time to time. And when that version of Alabama comes, they're really difficult to beat. But the problem is just that on the defensive side of the ball, it's not just R.J. Davis and Armando Bacot for UNC. Now you're seeing Cormac Ryan, you're seeing Harrison Ingram, you're seeing Seth Trimble all really step up. And, maybe you can mitigate or negate one of those guys, but keeping all of them down is going to be really tough for a shaky defensive team like Alabama.
And then, David, last one for you. This Creighton-Tennessee matchup feels like it could be a lot of fun. I mean, if we're being honest, most people in this part of the country probably don't know a ton about Creighton. Like, recognize the name. Maybe they can tell you, Greg McDermott. But beyond that, how good is Creighton? How good is Tennessee?
Well, the thing about Creighton is they are so fundamentally sound and so committed to a very successful identity that it's hard to just kind of have your way with them. And what they do, and I can already hear the complaints from Tennessee fans 48 hours out, is they don't foul. They do not foul. They foul less than anyone in the country by a significant margin. So they run you off the three-point line, so they're not going to let you shoot a three, and then they dare you to try and go score on Ryan Kalkbrenner at the rim because he's a 7-footer and one of the best shot blockers in the country. And so what ends up happening is you end up taking a lot of mid-range shots against Creighton, and then you end up getting really, really mad because they shoot 20 more free throws than you do because they don't foul. And a team like Tennessee does. And I can already see it at halftime of that game. Tennessee fans on my timeline are going to be upset that Creighton has shot 15 free throws and Tennessee has attempted 2. And so that's sort of the reality that you got to prepare yourself when you go up against Creighton, because they have a very well-defined, systematic way that they want to play, and it's really, really difficult to get them out of that.
David, always appreciate your time. Great insight. Looking forward to the weekend. We'll talk soon.
All right, Richard, I appreciate it.
David Cobb from CBS Sports on the Farm Bureau guest line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team, Mississippi